Popular music can be pretty monotonous in the sense that it's the same song recycled over and over and over again. There's a reason commercials have this little gecko and not an 8-minute guitar solo. They want something that activates the sleeper part of your brain and not has you questioning, what did Ronald McDonald mean by this? Everything memorable about a song makes a shitload of money. The problem is, some people have enough money and 15-year-old fangirls to last them 8 Nirvanas, and so they realize, lads, we're gonna die one day. Bit of a drag, innit? So they want to be timeless too. The Beatles by the mid-1960s were just so fed up with touring, it was so much extra effort to have to play the same 2, 3, or 4-year-old songs with the same old kit, and not their new stuff which nobody appreciated live. There was the anonymous death threat if they performed in Tokyo. They almost got the shit kicked out of them in the Philippines, and half of America hated them after Lennon, like an idiot, said. And so they went back to the studio and got to work. For their latest LP, the Beatles wanted to be more experimental than they ever have before. I mean, McCartney and Lennon in particular were inspired by the harmonics of an album like Pet Sounds, as well as the avant-garde quality of an album like Freak Out. To them, pushing the bill of pop music meant being different. That could be in the instruments that were used, the vocal dialects that were selected, or just the noises they wanted to incorporate. So they're sitting there in the studio trying to come up with a new sound, but there's a problem. Regardless of the gripes of the live performances, all of their fans are still Beatles fans. They expect the same quality and style that they're accustomed to. If they're too derivative from their traditional style of music, their album won't sell well, and there's a fear the critics might not like it. That's when McCartney comes up with the brilliant idea to create an album under the guise of a completely fake band. That way they can play whatever the hell they want, and if any fans are like, hey, this isn't the Beatles, they can be like, right, it's Sgt. Pepper. And so critics and fans love the album. You literally couldn't walk into a record shop without hearing it play constantly. It's one of the albums that pioneered the artistic pursuit of the album era in rock and roll. Now you might be wondering, dude, you titled this video, "The songs on Sgt. Pepper suck." When are you gonna get to that? I hate the Beatles, the Division Bell all the way, baby. And you'd be right. Initial critical analysis of this album was universal acclaim, and retrospective analysis has, backed some of that up, but some critics have gone back and said it's a little overproduced, and I can't help but agree. There are noises for the sake of noises, there are harmonies for the sake of harmonies, there are random instruments for the sake of random instruments, and in all honesty, there are songs in this album that you could not listen to one-off. I mean, are you really sitting down and listening to Harrison's Within You, Without You in the car? Lennon is at his most psychedelic, McCartney is at his most experimental, Harrison is at his most spiritualistic, and Ringo is just throwing down a groove at every single thing they throw at him. I love you, buddy. But some of these songs don't really feel like they go together. They can, but not individually. These styles clash. I mean, With a Little Help of My Friends is kind of cheesy. Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds is a little obnoxious. Within You, Without You is monotonous. So why do people listen to this album and love it? It's because the sum of these parts far outweigh these parts individually. We are spoiled nowadays by the selection era of music, and what it's made people do is just try and release these smash one hits. Okay, look, let's take off our big boy hats and be a little realistic here. Albums are not necessarily the best way to experience music. And look, I know Animals is good. Okay, calm down for like 2 seconds. Music, if we go back to the start of this video, is made to unwind people. It's made to be catchy. It's made to be pleasing. Not everybody is trying to have some deep introspective thoughts when they turn on a song and try and figure out how they made it. But sometimes the album is the only real way to experience some music. And when you go back to the 60s and you realize that's all they had access to, and they almost had to listen to the entire thing in the order it was produced to completion, you understand why people loved Sgt. Pepper. 12 out of the 13 of these songs are all under the guise of this fake band, and they know exactly what they're doing because they have an opening and a closing song for this section where the Beatles introduce Sgt. Pepper. It paints this beautiful mental image of Sgt. Pepper playing to hundreds at some venue, and the Beatles are just the lowly introductory and closing band to ease the fans into it. And you realize that this album depicts a live performance because it's the Beatles wanting to produce and perform these songs live without all of the hassle, without the fans throwing a fit at them, without the limitations imposed by their technology. And so they go, all right, screw it. We'll do it in the album. And so the fans sit in the audience and they're here to see quote-unquote Sgt. Pepper. And they watch the Beatles introduce them on stage with their opening song and sit through the next 12 or so tracks before the closing song hits. And they're good songs. They're not necessarily in the style they expect, but nonetheless a lot of the fans leave satisfied. But there is a trick associated with this album. The Beatles weren't just trying to be experimental, they wanted to be ambitious and create something that was worth a damn. And after that closing song plays, the applause at the end of it fades into an entirely new song. And that's when the opening chords to A Day in the Life strums out across the speakers. It paints another picture as the fans in the audience leave the stadium as they think the performance is coming to a close, but they stop as this new song starts playing, and they sit there and listen to what is the Beatles' most ambitious project to date. It's almost as if they're symbolically saying, the show is over and this is what you really came for. The end of the song starts to come up and thus the end of the album. There is this terrifying orchestral buildup where every single instrument you could ever think of is racing to a higher and higher note through any means necessary. The audience is on the edge of their seats as they watch 3 grand pianos get drug out from behind the curtains, and there's this moment of silence right at the end of it. And every single member of that room catches their breath, waiting in anticipation for what happens next. And that's when they knew they loved the album.